Welcome to the Golden Age of Cardboard podcast, where we remember a time when stacks of cards were held together with rubber bands and Mickey Mantles were put in bike spokes. We hope you will enjoy and reminisce as you come along with us as we tell stories about the baseball cards from the Golden Age of Baseball. We will examine the state of the vintage baseball card market and talk to some of the greatest collectors in the hobby. You won't be hearing us talk about any chrome or shiny cards here. Now, to take you on this retrospective journey, here's your host, direct from the shallow end of the gene pool, my son, Mike Moynihan.
Yo and hello everybody. Mike here, Golden Age of Cardboard podcast. Another week, another episode. We're in late May already. It's pretty great because we're only a couple of months away from the National, and just the best time of year. You know, we got a lot of hobby stuff happening over the next couple of months, and it's a lot to look forward to, and I certainly am. Today's episode is going to be really fun and mainly from you guys out there, because through DMs and I'll tell you all a story here in a minute once I get my guest on today about what prompted this episode. But I get a lot of DMs asking the question about how do I get started in vintage? And I don't know that I've ever done an episode just talking about that. So I thought that I would take some time to kind of go through that thought process. The best thing I'm going to say, if you don't hear anything else this episode, is there's no wrong way to do vintage. There's so much of it out there, but I didn't want to just throw my opinions out into the netherworld. I want you guys to hear from someone else too. So I decided to invite on one of my really good friends, Mr. Don, Field of Dreams Cards. Hi, Don.
What's up, Mike? How you doing, buddy?
You know, I'm hanging in there. Are you getting excited about the National?
I am. It's although I got a little taste this past weekend because I got to hang out with 4 YouTubers at the Pittsburgh show. So it's a primer for the National to get us ready, and I know you did as well with some YouTubers. So it's a little practice run for the National, kind of.
Yeah, you know, I was in Dallas at the Dallas show, and I think these two shows that we both attend are a great example of what we're going to talk about today, right? I mean, you and I were talking this, you know, earlier, getting ready to do this show, and you had some examples too. And so the idea simply, Dawn, is I'll tell you this story of what happened to me, and then we can start getting into it. At the Dallas show, I was sitting there, and a gentleman came up to me, and I apologize, I don't remember his name. He said he religiously listens to the show, and he'll know who he is when I talk about this conversation, because but I don't remember his name, and I apologize.
He's the one that watches it?
The one person
Right.
that religiously listens to the show. Exactly.
And you forgot his name.
And I forget. Yeah, I don't even, that's terrible, isn't it?
The worst at names.
So he came up to me and he said, "Hey, I've been in ultra modern for a while now. I've gotten back into the hobby." Like, this is such a familiar story that I hear all the time. I've gotten back into the hobby, buying the new stuff, shiny stuff. It's all great, but I really want to get into vintage. Where do I start? Was his question. And I thought that was such an open-ended question that has so many potential answers, right?
Yeah, there's no way to give one perfect answer for that. One of my suggestions is go after something you like, whether it's a team you follow, a certain player, maybe a set you collected as a kid and you don't have them anymore. You know, you don't have to go after the Babe Ruths and the Hank Aaron's and the Willie Mays to start off. You know, just dip your feet into the water and just test it out. But just think of something that interests you.
Well, Don, maybe tell your story about your personal journey in collecting, how you got onto vintage, and just what's the appeal to you. And again, it's going to be very personal to each person why they love vintage so much. But tell that story. Maybe that can help.
Right. So my first pack of cards was in 1976, and I was 9 years old, and I had wrecked my bicycle at my neighbor's house and had to get 15 stitches in my knee. And the neighbor, she brought me over a pack of cards. That was the first pack I ever had. And so for me, I kind of started in the vintage area.
But remember, at the time, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but at the time, those were modern cards. Those were the
That's
current.
where I was going to go. So I was a
cards,
modern collector
Yeah.
at one time. And just, like a lot of guys on here, except for you, because I don't think you've ever stopped, but took a few hiatuses. And I remember the first really vintage card I bought, and I walked into this card store. And at the time, this was in the early 90s, there were card stores all over the place. And I had no clue what to buy. I didn't know anything about the years. I knew some of the old Pirates. And I ended up buying a 1960 Bill Mazeroski. So it goes back to kind of what I was saying earlier is my favorite team. At the time, he wasn't a Hall of Famer, but, I think it was $10. And, I still remember that card. And like I said earlier, there's just no right way to collect. There's nobody that collects exactly the same. Even though we're very similar, Mike.
Right.
We're not 100%.
But why that Mazeroski? What was the...
I think it was familiarity,
Okay.
because I knew who he was in the team. And I figured, well, for $10, I knew he was considered a really good player. I didn't see him play, at least on defense. So that's what attracted me to it, being a Pirates fan. It was later on that I got to learn about other cards and players, and being a fan of the game is what attracts me to vintage. And I'll buy some packs of modern cards every year just for fun. But if you hear me on my channel talking about, my Stan Musial Modern, I don't know what any of those sets are. I don't know the names. And to be honest, I don't try to.
I just think there's a distinct collector life cycle that we all go through. That if you stay in the hobby long enough, we all start out as current collectors, right?
Right.
Current era, whatever that is. Mine was the early 80s. Yours was the late 70s. Others might be the 2000s or whatever, right? Wherever you get into the hobby, you're most likely going to collect the players you can watch on TV and the teams that are your hometown teams or whatever, right? And then during this life cycle, you mature and you get older and you go, maybe I should get into some of this stuff. And as you mature, like as I matured as a human being, it doesn't mean I didn't want to be a kid all the time. Like whatever was current, it's not that you have to only do one or the other, vintage or modern, or it can be all inclusive, but you start going, your tastes start, you start refining your tastes over time. It's like I kind of want Roberto Clemente or Mickey Mantle or Stan Musial,
Right.
or those types of cards, right? Whether it's set building, a 58 top set or something like that. And I just think most collectors, again, if you do it long enough, you're going to start having a hankering for the old stuff. And that
go ahead, Mike. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
That never ends.
Right.
I've always been a post-war Hall of Fame guy. Now being on YouTube and meeting you guys and watching stuff, I didn't know anything about food and beverage. I knew very little about pre-war. I still know very little about pre-war, but I'm starting to pick some of it up. Starting to pick up some of the food and beverage. There's just so much out there. Like, don't be intimidated because you're never going to get it all. You're not going to know it all. There's so much, but you just keep changing and just going after stuff. And my gosh, if you're watching this or listening to this podcast, get on YouTube. You will get such an education. If you're intimidated by old cards, there's so many of us on here. And these people are willing to help. If anyone ever watches my channel and has a question, I'd gladly answer it, as would you, Mike, and a bunch of other guys. That's the beauty of having this that I didn't have 20 years ago.
Yeah.
You learn about this stuff from other people.
Yeah. And I hear a lot. I want to buy the right stuff. And to me, that's the wrong question someone should be asking themselves. They need to be asking themselves, what do I care about? right? And
Yeah, I mean, there's no right stuff. I mean, I bought cards that would I buy again? Not necessarily. Most of them I would. Maybe the condition I wouldn't buy now that I bought back then. But I'm kind of like you. I don't. Once I have the card, I'm done. I don't upgrade it. Very rarely. Just move on. And it's what I said earlier. None of us collect the same. There's no right or wrong card to get. It's what you said. Do you like it? Then that's the right card.
yeah, I remember I loved the 60 top set always and bought those. And then I would go to a show, and like my vintage journey has been very progressive in the sense that I didn't just dive headfirst into vintage. And I think people rarely do, but it was all at the beginning, it was always a monetary issue.
Right.
Liking vintage was never the problem. It was affording vintage.
Sure.
And saying, okay, I'm going to dabble in some of this stuff. I always liked the old stuff. And so I would go, I'm going to buy this card or that card. And I remember going to a national, like 8 years ago and seeing a Roy Campanella card and just thinking it was so cool. And that was it. That's all I bought. You know what I mean? Like, and then I started, maybe I can go get the next one. I want to add to his run, or I want to add more players from that particular set. It was a 53 tops, by the way. And at that time, I wish I could go back, 4 or 5 years, and I would empty the bank account buying higher grade vintage. But I was trying to make the best fiscal decisions, around my hobby. And like, I can only spend so much, and I have other stuff I wanted. This is when I was still a player collector, of Josh Hamilton. And so most of my hobby money was going to that. What I hear a lot is I want to buy the right stuff. I don't want to make a mistake. Do not be afraid. Another piece of advice that I think Don will echo is do not be afraid to make a mistake, because you will, and it's okay. Like, you will end up buying something that you go, God, I wish I wouldn't have bought that. No matter how much research you do, no matter how much planning you do, just get ready for some amount of disappointment in your journey in collecting vintage.
And on the flip side of that, you're going to be like, I can't believe I didn't buy that card.
Right.
But I could have. And it's like, I'm kicking myself for it.
But that's a great point. My regrets of not buying stuff is way greater than my regrets of, man, I wish I wouldn't have bought that. Right.
Oh, without a doubt.
I mean, it's 100-fold more, man, I wish I would have bought that. So, and I remember the cards. I remember a lot of great cards that I bought and stories around them. I also have a lot of great stories of remembering cards that I remember seeing and not pulling the trigger on and regretting that later.
Right.
Those stories stick with you. And what all that does is build experience. Like, all we're doing is building a story, right? In your collecting life. And all these little experiences start mounting up, and you turn into, I hate to use the word expert, because I think that's a terrible word. None of us are experts at anything.
No.
But
we just have some experience.
We're experienced. That's right. And experience turns into wisdom, right? And so what Don and I are trying to do today is impart some wisdom on you, in that don't be afraid to make mistakes. You can't buy the perfect thing every time.
And I've always found for myself, if I see a card and I absolutely love it, and it's in my price range, I've never once regretted that. Like, that's telling you, at least for me, that's the right card.
Yeah.
Right there, whoever it is. And it's like, I just see it and go, wow. And like I said, if it fits the budget, then pull the trigger on it. Like an example, I'm not going to say the card because the guy hasn't shown it on his video yet, but John Wade Boggs fan said, Don, I'm in between two cards. And I looked at them both, and I said, I'm not going to give you my opinion, but all day long I would buy one over the other. And then he said, well, no. He goes, you would pick this one, right? Which he was right. I was like, yes, I would. And he ended up getting it, and he'll show it soon. I don't want to spoil it.
That's awesome.
But again, that's the beauty of having someone like John. Even though he's around our age and collecting the 70s, he's kind of jumped back into vintage. He was so heavy on Wade Boggs cards, and so he was relying on someone else to help him out. And to me, I felt like he could get the other card all day long, but this card, you don't see as much. And it was in his budget, and I was like, go for it.
And there's nothing wrong with being a player collector either, right?
No, I'm not saying that. No,
I know you weren't. I was just I was emphasizing
Yeah.
that point. I know, of course, you don't feel that way. What I try to tell people if they're getting into vintage is the whole, you hear it a lot on my channel, you hear it on Eric and other people. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And the vintage world is totally that way. Unless you're, win the lottery, you're not going to have everything today. And so being selective, being patient, biding your time to get cards that you want to add to your collection, think of the journey of it. And I'm guilty of not doing that sometimes. Like
I was just going to say, I've had to force myself to rein it in because I just want to go.
Yeah. I'm guilty of not following my own advice, which is probably when it's good advice is when meaning it's hard advice to follow. Right. And even for ourselves who've been doing this for a long time, is that I'll start building a set. Like I built my 60 or what year was it? 60 tops. I think I finished it in like a month. And everybody's like, enjoy the journey. And I'm like, I want to get it done.
I sent you some cards for that set. You were done in no time.
Yeah. Right. So I enjoyed it and I'm glad I have it. And I just looked through it the other day, literally.
Right.
So it's not, but all of us are on budgets of some kind. And so you have to be patient. You have to pick your spots. But you also have to be opportunistic when they come up. And the reason why I say take it slow, especially if you're new to vintage, is that you may start going down a certain path and realize that doesn't do it for you for whatever reason. And you don't want to be so deep into something that you're kind of pot committed to that project. And so if you take it slow and like, if you pick a player, Steve Carlton, or I'm trying to think of like not an expensive guy to do a player run, or you want to get all of the 1960 Pittsburgh Pirates team cards, all their cards, buy a few of them and then go, okay, do I still love these a couple of weeks later, a month later? And like, okay. And if you're itching to buy them, like buy more of them, that's a good sign.
And that's a good set because really you only have Clemente in there. That's super expensive.
Right. That's one example, but Yankees or Cardinals or Dodgers or whatever. Right.
And I tend to do sets sometimes that don't have Mickey Mantle.
Right.
Because it's just so much more affordable. Not that I don't like Mickey Mantle, and I have 4 or 5 of his cards, but to me, I just don't feel that he's worth the money that it's going to cost you in some of the sets. So I did the 54 top set. There's no Mantle in it. I'm working on the 50 Bowman set. I mean, there are Jackie Robinsons in there. I'm not saying they're all cheap, and I did the 56 set. It's got Mantle in it, so there's just other ways to go around it if you're not a particular fan of that guy.
Well, you could even do like one thing. I love all-star cards, right? Especially late 50s, early 60s. You might go, hey, I'm going to go do the 58 tops all-star set. And I try to say to people, bite off small chunks at first when you're getting started, right? Don't be like, I'm going to collect my dumbass, pick up every card from 1950 to 1989. Right. But I'm going to do this all-star. And that's actually how it started for me. I started going, I'm going to do the 73 Hall of Famer run. And I got done. I'm like, okay, I want to keep going. Then I did the 60 tops Hall of Fame run. Mm-hmm. And then it was a project that built on itself. It didn't start out with this gigantic project, but as I got more and more pieces of it done, the just logical continuation of that was to continue adding sets. And so do an all-star set. There's so many great players and they're relatively cheap, right? Less than, base cards or whatever. And buy the grades you can, buying graded vintage. And people ask me this all the time. I want to get your opinion because I know yours is different than mine. And that's a good thing. I'm a PSA guy, right? I buy PSA stuff, right. But, would you tell people if they're starting in vintage because I get this question all the time. Do I buy graded? And if so, what company? Or do I buy raw and then get it graded? Or do I just buy raw? What's your kind of, what
So I'm
advice do you-
obviously biased because, like you, I like my cards graded. Not that there's anything with raw. I mean, I bought a raw Diamond Star Al Simmons this weekend
I
just
saw
because
it.
I couldn't find a graded one. I'm going to send it in to get graded, but I also knew the collector, and I'm not worried about it being legit or not. And again, opposite to you, I like, or not like, but I collect PSA and SGC. But I'm a big fan of graded for a couple reasons. One, I'm 95% sure it's legit. No one in my family has interest in my cards, so they're documented what they are. And like you, the grade does not matter nearly as much to me as it used to. I mean, I have some cards that are 2s and 3s that I think look like 6 and 7s. You know, I have some 7 and 8s, but I got those when they were much cheaper. So don't feel you have to get 7s or 8s either. I mean, there's some collectors, that's the way they collect, and they can afford it. To each his own. I can't. And to be honest, like some of the cards, like are you familiar with the Black Swamp Find?
Oh,
cards?
yeah, sure.
They almost look too perfect. They look like reprints.
Like, wait a second.
Like
Cards
they're
aren't
so
supposed to be-
pristine that they don't have any patina on them. They don't look like they're from that era. And I don't mind that on vintage. I was telling someone the other day, I'm going to be a lot pickier on a late 60s Clemente than I am a 1934 Gaudi player on condition. You know, some of these cards, or maybe it's Jackie Robinson, I just want them in my collection. And I know you do too. With certain players that it's like, it's fine. I'm not saying there's anything against raw. It's just my personal preference that I like them graded. I like the way SGC looks. I don't think it's a bad idea to start off with getting a few graded until you kind of get a feel for what's going on, so you don't get ripped off on a raw
literally
one.
and figuratively.
Yeah. I mean, unless it's if you're buying a 1975 Steve Garvey, I doubt it's trimmed.
Right.
Someone took it, but there's no way I'm buying a 1950 Bowman Jackie Robinson raw.
Right.
Personally.
And there's no, just so everybody knows, there's no guarantee that those aren't trimmed either. We're not,
correct.
All the grading companies, none of them are perfect.
Yeah, I mean, they're human beings, but
they make mistakes. But go ahead.
Don't get caught up in the years of vintage either. I mean, what do they say? Technically, Mike, it's 79 or 80 back. And if you look at a lot of dealers only buying 75 and back, for me personally, vintage is 83 and back. And that's only because that's when I quit collecting cards as a teenager. So 83 is my memory of collecting cards as a kid. There's no set rule on what is vintage. I mean, stuff in the 90s is technically vintage if you go by the years. And we're not resellers. So for me, I don't care if it's an 82, 83. And I know you collect well past that. So unless you're looking to as purely an investment, it again goes back to what you like. I like 83, 82, 81 because it's memories for me. And that's what a lot of this vintage does, is it brings back memories collecting. But, there's guys like Jake and Alex, younger guys in the hobby that love vintage. And it's so cool to see those guys collecting it too. Because I sometimes feel it shows it's a lot of older guys sitting down with their list, picking out cards. And it's nice to see some of the younger guys that love baseball and the history of it.
Yeah.
I've got a 16-year-old son who I try getting him to go to shows, look at stuff, and he could care less. And I wish I could share that with him, but
yeah, you can't force it.
No.
I mean, I know that as a kid and especially as an adult, with everything that's out there, I never saw Mantle or Clemente or any of those guys play. Mays, Aaron, I was just being born when they were retiring, so it doesn't matter. I never saw Ruth or Gehrig but I've learned.
Say you love Lou Gehrig. I love Stan Musial. We didn't see, neither one of us saw those guys play,
but we've learned about them over the years. We've taken the time to educate ourselves about the great stories and listening. And I mean, I remember I read Glory of Their Times, which I've told this story.
You listen to that on tape or
Yeah.
audio?
Yes.
Oh my God, is that awesome?
So much better on audio.
Yes.
Way to everyone out there. Glory of Their Times. And all it made me do is I was listening to it and I read it as well, was want to go buy cards of those players.
Right.
And they're all, T206s and T205s, T207s, that era, cigarette era cards, some candy stuff. But I was just looking for cards because I wanted to connect the stories that I read and heard to something I could look at and go, man, this is the guy that Rube Marquard was talking about, or that you know what I mean? Or the Marco Boner, or the this or that, right? All these different things that I never saw in person, and yet it connected with me at a level that I can't explain very well, but it's definitely there,
Yeah, I mean, I think those interviews were the early mid-60s they were taking. So a lot of those guys were still around, even though they were pretty old then. But just to hear people that actually played against Ty Cobb, Walter Johnson, Christy Mathewson, we all know they're great, but to actually hear someone who played with them or against them, it's a great resource. Another great resource, if you pick up any of the Frank Slocum books, you can get them on eBay. And are you familiar with those, Mike?
No.
They're he's got, I don't have one in front of me. It's pictures of every year. So he's got 3 of them, I think. So the one starts from the 1800s to 1956. And then the next one goes 53 to 90. Okay. It's got photos of every card in the book.
Oh, wow.
So if you go on eBay, I have those. I actually have it right over there. If you don't care if I get up and get it real quick.
I don't care if you go get it. The people listening on podcast might care because they can't see you, but that's all right. Who's the author again?
Frank Slocum.
Frank, I'm writing that down.
So here, I don't even know what page I'm going to open to, but look, so here's 75.
Oh, so cool.
Let's just randomly go back to 65.
Wow. So
it's just a really fun book to go through. I mean, you can spend hours on it, but just go on PSA's website or just Google any of these years of cards. You're going to see the cards.
Yeah. Another thing that made me connect a lot was the baseball documentary by Ken Burns.
Ken Burns, right.
Reading, I had all these books when I was a kid that, the superstars of baseball, stuff. This is all stuff written in the 80s about stuff that happened in the, from 1900 to the 60s, I would guess. And it always so cool to read about that stuff. And then the Ken Burns documentary took it to another level for me because you could see it. They had clips and they would do interviews and, integrate all of that together. It became more alive to me. And so all of these things that you're talking about, that I'm talking about, are ways you can, if you go, I don't know what I like, right? Okay, I get that. Do some of this stuff. But I think the core of it is you have to love baseball, right? I mean, if you don't love baseball and have an inkling to learn history, you're probably not going to appreciate vintage. And
again, we're just talking about baseball because that's what Mike and I primarily collect. But if you're a basketball fan or football or hockey,
that's certainly
everything applies. What we're saying here to those sports, you just
for sure
go after those cards.
Yeah, but if you can't make a connection somehow, you're going to end up spending money on vintage that you just find unfulfilling, right?
Yeah, you have to love it. Like for me, I'm not into comic books. I know you are, and I have no urge to learn about them. Don't know if I go to a flea market, one's worth $100,000 or $1. I know nothing about it. But if I had a desire or passion, I would obviously, don't get into this just because you want to make money. Because you got to know what you're buying. Yeah. And vintage collectors, we're not in it for that. I don't really know many people that, unless you're a dealer, but, everyone I know here on YouTube is pretty much a collector.
Right.
And don't feel that you have to we keep saying this over and over again, that you have to buy the most popular cars or the most expensive. Like we both have them. But January before 21, I was looking for a cheap way to collect. And we have a great Negro League history here in Pittsburgh with the Grays and the Crawfords. And so I started researching guys that played in the minor leagues and major leagues and started picking up their cards. They're really not worth anything. They're guys most of you have never heard of, because I'm purposely not doing the Jackie Robinsons, the Ernie Banks, the Hank Aaron, those guys. But I don't know anything about them. As I do a show, I should back up. I do a show, minor league, not a show, but a videos, Negro League to major league. And as I decide to do one, I learn about those guys. And it's going back to what you said about glory of their times. Those $7, $8, $9 cards mean a lot to me now, because I'm like, wow, look at the history of this guy playing in the Negro leagues, and he got to play in the major leagues. So there's so many ways to collect on here that you don't have to be breaking the bank to do it. I mean, we all want those cards, and but we have other part of our collections too that they mean something to you. Like I collect guys that grew up in Western Pennsylvania, get their cards for $1 or something, and they're not all vintage, but
I collect guys that played at TCU.
Yeah, I do that with my Penn State football guys, right?
Yeah. It's what I want to encourage people as you're listening to this, and this will probably be a shorter episode because Don and I could just keep repeating all the things,
right? Which I kind of feel like I'm doing a little
but
bit.
We don't have to exasperate the point. But I do want to say that don't be afraid to ask. Don't feel like I should know this because I've been collecting for X number of years, or they're going to think I'm stupid if I ask this question. You don't know until you ask. And don't be afraid to ask multiple people, different questions, and just let people help you. We, especially men, we have a problem asking for help for anything, but the reality is unless you want to learn trial by fire on your own, which is, I would tell you, a very dangerous and expensive proposition. Let people help you. Let us tell you what mistakes that we've already made so that you can avoid them.
I was just going to say that point because I know, like, Chuck Northside guy, he'll be the first to admit it. He's like, I jumped in and I saw this Dean's Cards guy. And for you guys that don't know, his cards are typically more expensive than other dealers. And he went crazy buying cards off him.
Yeah.
Live and learn, but if you watch his videos, it's like, okay, I know I'm going to pay more from this guy. And you're right about asking us. We all love this hobby. We wouldn't be on here as much as we are. And we love to talk about it. So if someone asks you a question, we're thrilled that you even have interest in it.
Yeah.
And again, keep in mind, it's just our opinion. It's not fact. Just because I like it doesn't mean you like it, Mike, and vice versa.
But I tend to like a lot of it.
As long as you're having fun and enjoying it, don't be afraid. To be honest, I'm intimidated by modern because there's so much out there.
Right.
That I'm like, at least I know, hey, Willie Stargell's rookie is 1963, and I know which card to get. Wander Franco, I'm just showing you one. Bob Lewis gave it to me this weekend. It just happens to be sitting by me. Like, I'm not interested in having 200 cards of his.
Right.
So,
yeah. Well, I think we'll cut it off there just because I think we've covered a lot of things. However, if you do have additional questions, you can send them to me. Happy to answer them on Instagram at Baseball Collector Mike. If you're listening on podcast, if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're watching on YouTube and you want to do it through Instagram because you're, for some reason, even though we've told you not to be embarrassed about asking that question because you feel silly, great. Send it to me on Instagram. If you want to put it down here and get other people's opinion as they read the chat on YouTube, great. Go for that too. But
can I give you one story before we wrap up here, Mike?
Yeah, sure.
So last year was my first national, and I'm literally there for about 15 minutes, and I pick up this Honus Wagner card, and I say to the dealer, I said, "What do you want for this?" He goes, 30. I said, how about 26? He's like, I can do 27. I'm like, fine. I'm not going to beat you up over $1. He meant $27,000. I thought he was talking $27. So we all make mistakes. And I was so embarrassed. I walked away there like, oh my God. Like I couldn't imagine someone would let me hold a $30,000 card in my hand. But
no, it was only 27,000 because he was going to give it to you for 27,000.
Right. So I laugh about it now and I rip on myself. So you know what? I'm experienced and look what I'm doing. I'm looking at a $30,000 card trying to give the guy $26. So it is what it is.
See, we all make mistakes. I've bought a bunch of fake autographs before. I mean, believe me, no one's immune from the school of hard knocks. No one gets out of that for free. So Don, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, man. Always. Anytime. I enjoy it.
Yeah, I will see you guys hopefully next week. I plan on doing an episode next week. We'll see. But Don, I'll see you soon.
Sounds good, Mike. Thanks, brother.
All right, guys. Y'all take care. Keep collecting.